Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your country has been ripped apart, not by war, not by invasion, but by a single signature on a piece of paper. That's exactly what happened to Hungary on June 4th, 1920. In one devastating moment, this once mighty kingdom lost 72% of its territory, 64% of its population, and became one of the smallest nations in Europe. Millions of Hungarians found themselves trapped in foreign countries overnight. Their crime? Simply being on the wrong side of a border drawn by strangers thousands of miles away. This is the story of the Treaty of Trianon, the most catastrophic day in Hungarian history. If you love your country, subscribe now. If you love your mother, leave a comment below. To understand Hungary's tragedy, we must journey back to a time when Hungary wasn't just a small European nation, but the beating heart of one of the world's most powerful empires. For nearly 1,000 years, Hungary stood as a colossus in Central Europe, its influence stretching across lands that today form parts of 7 different countries. The story begins in 896 AD when Magyar tribes, led by Arpad, crossed the Carpathian Mountains and established their homeland in the heart of Europe. These weren't just wandering nomads. They were skilled warriors, brilliant strategists, and visionary state builders. By the year 1000, under King Stephen I, Hungary had transformed into a Christian kingdom that commanded respect from Rome to Constantinople. The medieval Kingdom of Hungary was a powerhouse. It controlled vast territories including modern-day Slovakia, Transylvania, Croatia, parts of Serbia, Ukraine, Austria, Poland, and Romania. Hungarian kings ruled from the Adriatic Sea to the Carpathian Peaks. The kingdom served as Christianity's shield against Ottoman expansion, earning the title Antemurale Christianitatis, the bulwark of Christianity. But maintaining such a vast kingdom came at a terrible price. The 150-year Ottoman occupation from 1541 to 1699 devastated Hungary. The Turks controlled the Central Plains, while Habsburg Austria seized the Western territories, and Transylvania remained semi-independent in the east. The Hungarian population plummeted from 4 million to less than 3 million. Entire cities were reduced to ash. The once thriving agricultural heartland became a battlefield. Yet Hungary survived. After the Ottomans were expelled, Hungary rebuilt itself under Habsburg rule. But the relationship was never easy. Hungarians chafed under Austrian domination. They wanted autonomy, respect, and recognition of their ancient rights. This tension exploded in 1848 when Hungarians launched a revolutionary war for independence led by the passionate Lajos Kossuth. The revolution failed, crushed by combined Austrian and Russian forces. But it planted seeds that would bloom 2 decades later. In 1867, after Austria's humiliating defeat by Prussia, Emperor Franz Joseph made a pragmatic decision. He offered Hungarians a compromise, the Ausgleich. This created the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy, where Hungary gained equal status with Austria. This was Hungary's golden age. From 1867 to 1914, the Hungarian half of the empire flourished spectacularly. Budapest transformed from a provincial town into one of Europe's most magnificent capitals, rivaling Paris and Vienna. The city's population exploded from 280,000 to over 1 million. Elegant boulevards, grand parliament buildings, and the first underground railway on the European continent showcased Hungarian ambition and prosperity. Hungarian industry boomed. Factories sprouted across the land. Railways connected every corner of the kingdom. Hungarian scientists, artists, and intellectuals gained international recognition. The kingdom's population swelled to over 20 million people. Agriculture flourished in the fertile plains. Hungary exported grain, livestock, and wine across Europe. But beneath this golden surface, dangerous fault lines were spreading. The Kingdom of Hungary was home to not just Hungarians, but also millions of Romanians, Slovaks, Serbs, Croats, Ukrainians, and Germans. These minority populations comprised nearly half of the kingdom's inhabitants, and increasingly, they wanted their own national destinies. Hungarian leaders made a fatal mistake. Rather than embracing diversity and granting autonomy to these groups, they pursued aggressive majorization policies. They tried to force everyone to speak Hungarian, adopt Hungarian culture, and identify as Hungarian. They closed Romanian and Slovak schools. They discriminated against non-Hungarian speakers in government jobs. They gerrymandered districts to maintain Hungarian political dominance. These policies bred resentment. Romanian intellectuals in Transylvania began dreaming of union with Romania. Slovak nationalists imagined their own homeland. Serbian activists plotted to create a South Slav state. The more Hungary tried to force unity, the more its subject peoples longed for separation. By 1914, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a powder keg waiting to explode. And the spark came in Sarajevo on June 28, when a Serbian nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and declared war. Within weeks, Europe descended into the nightmare of World War I. Hungary had no choice but to fight alongside Austria and Germany. Young Hungarian men marched to battlefields in Italy, Russia, Serbia, and Romania. Over 3 million Hungarians served in the Imperial Army. More than 660,000 never came home. The war drained Hungary's resources, decimated its economy, and shattered its population's morale. As the war dragged on, the empire began crumbling from within. Minority populations saw their opportunity. Romanian politicians in Transylvania secretly negotiated with the Allies, promising support in exchange for territorial gains. Slovak leaders made similar deals. Croatian representatives plotted their independence. By autumn 1918, the Central Powers were collapsing. Germany was exhausted. Austria-Hungary was disintegrating. Revolution broke out in Budapest on October 31st, led by Count Mihai Karoli, a liberal aristocrat who promised peace, democracy, and reconciliation with the minorities. Hungary declared independence from Austria and transformed into a republic. But it was too late. The nationalities weren't interested in staying in any Hungarian state, reformed or not. Romanian troops invaded Transylvania. Czech and Slovak forces occupied Upper Hungary. Serbian armies seized southern territories. Within weeks, foreign soldiers controlled 2/3 of historical Hungarian lands. Karoli's government naively believed that embracing democracy and Wilson's principles would save Hungary. American President Woodrow Wilson had promised self-determination for all peoples. Surely this applied to Hungarians too? The government disarmed the Hungarian military, hoping to show goodwill. They waited for the Paris Peace Conference to deliver justice. Instead, they received betrayal. The Allied powers gathered in Paris in 1919 with one goal: punishing the defeated empires and rewarding their own allies. Hungary, despite never being the primary aggressor, would pay the highest price of all. What punishment awaited Hungary at the Paris Peace Conference? Will justice prevail, or will an entire nation be sacrificed? Stay with us to discover the shocking truth. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold history. The Palace of Versailles, January 1919. The victorious Allied powers gathered in the glittering halls where French kings once held court. Representatives from Britain, France, Italy, and the United States prepared to reshape the map of Europe. But the defeated nations, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey, weren't invited to negotiate. They would simply be told their fate. Hungary sent a delegation led by Count Albert Apponyi, a distinguished 73-year-old statesman who spoke 6 languages fluently. Apponyi was Hungary's last hope, an eloquent defender who might convince the Allies to show mercy. But he faced an impossible situation. The conference was dominated by the Big Four: Woodrow Wilson of America, David Lloyd George of Britain, Georges Clemenceau of France, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. These men had little love for Hungary. France wanted revenge against all Germanic powers, and Austria-Hungary qualified in French eyes. Britain cared primarily about maintaining European balance. Italy wanted territorial gains for itself. And Wilson, despite his noble rhetoric about self-determination, was overwhelmed and outmaneuvered by his European counterparts. More importantly, the Allies had already made secret promises. The Treaty of Bucharest, signed in 1916, promised Romania massive territorial gains, including all of Transylvania, if it joined the Allied side. Similar secret agreements had been made with the future Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. These treaties were signed years before anyone considered Hungarian perspectives or Hungarian rights. The conference established various commissions to determine new borders, but these commissions operated under clear bias. The Territorial Commission for Czechoslovakia was led by politicians who had already decided that Czechoslovakia should include all of Upper Hungary, even districts where Hungarians formed the majority. The Romanian Commission similarly presumed that all of Transylvania should go to Romania, regardless of ethnic composition. Hungarian representatives tried desperately to present their case. They brought detailed ethnic maps showing where Hungarians actually lived. They proposed plebiscites, letting local populations vote on their preferred country. They suggested autonomous regions where minorities could govern themselves while remaining within Hungary. They even offered to accept international supervision and guarantee minority rights. None of it mattered. The Allies had already decided. On January 15, 1920, the completed treaty was presented to the Hungarian delegation. They were given 2 weeks to respond. No negotiations, no modifications. Simply accept or reject. Count Apponyi delivered his legendary defense speech on January 16th. Speaking without notes in flawless French, he passionately argued Hungary's case for over an hour. He reminded the Allies of Hungary's 1,000-year history as a unified state. He detailed how the proposed borders would create absurd situations, cutting off cities from their agricultural hinterlands, severing railway lines, and trapping millions of Hungarians outside their homeland. He invoked Woodrow Wilson's own words about self-determination and justice. He pointed out that the proposed borders contradicted these principles entirely. If self-determination was the goal, why not hold plebiscites? Why not let the people decide? He warned prophetically that these unjust borders would breed future conflicts and instability. The assembled delegates listened politely. Some were moved. Several later admitted that Apponyi's speech was the most eloquent defense they'd heard. But it changed nothing. The great powers had made their decision, and they wouldn't reverse it for any Hungarian argument, no matter how compelling. The harsh reality was that Hungary had no leverage. It had no army to resist, no powerful allies to intervene, no economic strength to bargain. The country was exhausted from war, ravaged by a brief communist revolution, and occupied by foreign troops. Hungary was completely at the mercy of powers that had little mercy to spare. The treaty that emerged was called the Treaty of Trianon, named after the palace building where it would be signed. The document ran to over 200 pages, but its core message could be summarized in a few devastating sentences. Hungary would lose most of its territory, most of its population, most of its resources, and most of its future prospects. The specific terms were crushing. Transylvania, including the Székely regions where Hungarians had lived for centuries, would go to Romania. Upper Hungary would form part of the new Czechoslovakia. Croatia, Slavonia, and other southern territories would join the new Yugoslavia. Even small strips of land would go to Austria and Poland. In total, Hungary would be reduced from 325,411 square kilometers to just 93,030 square kilometers, a loss of 72% of its territory. The population would shrink from 20.9 million to 7.6 million, losing 64% of its people. But even more painful was the ethnic reality. Over 3.3 million ethnic Hungarians would be trapped in neighboring countries, becoming instant minorities overnight. The treaty also imposed military restrictions, limiting Hungary's army to just 35,000 men, barely enough to maintain internal order. It demanded reparations payments that Hungary could never afford. It took away Hungary's access to important natural resources, gold mines in Transylvania, salt deposits in the north, forests in the Carpathians, and the agricultural wealth of the borderlands. Perhaps most insulting were the treaty's territorial provisions that seemed designed purely to humiliate Hungary. Cities that were overwhelmingly Hungarian were nevertheless assigned to neighboring countries. Pozsony, Bratislava, where 42% of the population was Hungarian, went to Czechoslovakia. Kalasvar, Cluj, the cultural capital of Transylvanian Hungarians, went to Romania. Ujadek, Novi Sad, a Hungarian majority city, went to Yugoslavia. The Hungarians pleaded for plebiscites in disputed territories. The Allies refused everywhere except in one small region, Sopron, and only because Austria insisted on it. When that plebiscite was finally held in December 1921, the local population voted overwhelmingly to remain with Hungary, proving that people's actual wishes differed greatly from the borders the Allies had drawn. But by then, it was too late. The treaty had been signed. Hungary's fate was sealed. On June 4, 1920, in the Grand Trianon Palace at Versailles, Hungarian delegates signed the document that would haunt their nation for generations. Why did this happen? How could a nation that had existed for 1,000 years be dismembered so completely? These questions haunted Hungarians then and continue to puzzle historians today. The Treaty of Trianon wasn't simply a peace settlement. It was one of history's most controversial and consequential territorial reorganizations. But what drove the Allied powers to impose such harsh terms? The official justification seemed straightforward: self-determination. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points had promised that national groups should govern themselves. Romanians should live in Romania. Slovaks should live in Slovakia. Serbs should live in a South Slav state. This sounded noble and democratic. Who could argue against people choosing their own destiny? But the reality was far more complex and far less noble. The principle of self-determination was applied selectively and cynically. When it served Allied interests, it was invoked passionately. When it conflicted with Allied goals, it was conveniently forgotten. Consider Transylvania. The region had a population of approximately 5.2 million people. Romanians formed the largest group at 53%, but Hungarians comprised 32%, and Germans another 10%. Yet the entire region was given to Romania without any plebiscite. No one asked the Hungarians of Transylvania if they wanted to become Romanian citizens. No one consulted the Szekely Hungarians who had lived in their Carpathian homeland for 8 centuries. If self-determination was truly the guiding principle, the logical solution would have been partition. Let the Romanian majority areas join Romania. Let the Hungarian majority areas remain with Hungary. Or at least hold referendums to let people choose. But this never happened. Why? The answer lay in the secret treaties signed during the war. In 1916, when the war's outcome was uncertain, the Allies desperately needed Romania to join their side. King Ferdinand and his government demanded a high price: all of Transylvania. The Allies agreed. This treaty was signed 3 years before the Paris Peace Conference even began. The fate of Transylvania was decided not by principles of justice, but by wartime necessity. Similar dynamics shaped Czechoslovakia's borders. The new nation was supposed to unite Czechs and Slovaks. But the borders drawn gave Czechoslovakia a massive strip of southern territory where Hungarians formed the majority. In some districts, Hungarians comprised 70 to 80% of the population. Why were these areas included in Czechoslovakia? The answer was strategic. Czechoslovakia's leaders, particularly Edvard Benes and Tomáš Masaryk, convinced the Allies that their new nation needed defensible borders. They argued that the natural frontier along the Danube River was essential for security. They pointed to railways and economic connections. They successfully lobbied to include Hungarian majority areas for purely strategic reasons. But here's the mystery that deepens the more you examine it. The Allies weren't ignorant about the ethnic composition of these territories. They had detailed ethnic maps prepared by experts. They knew exactly where Hungarians, Romanians, Slovaks, and others lived. They received reports from their own observers on the ground. They heard testimony from Hungarian representatives showing the ethnic facts. So why did they ignore this evidence? Several factors combined to seal Hungary's fate, and understanding them reveals much about how international politics truly operates, often far removed from the noble principles leaders profess. First, there was revenge. France, which dominated the Paris negotiations, wanted to punish all the Central Powers severely. Austria-Hungary was seen as Germany's accomplice, equally guilty for the war's outbreak. French leaders, particularly Clemenceau, believed that harsh punishment would prevent future aggression. They wanted to ensure that no strong Central European power could ever threaten European stability again. Second, there was the successor state strategy. The Allies wanted to create strong new nations that would serve as barriers against future German expansion and potential Bolshevik spread from Russia. Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia were envisioned as a little entente that would maintain stability in Eastern Europe, making these nations as large and powerful as possible, even at Hungary's expense, served this strategic goal. Third, there was economic motivation. Transylvania wasn't just territory, it contained enormous mineral wealth. Gold mines, salt deposits, natural gas, and fertile agricultural land made it a prize worth having. Romania gained economic resources that transformed it into a regional power. Czechoslovakia acquired important industrial regions. These economic considerations mattered more than ethnic justice. Fourth, there was the propaganda war. Throughout the war and during the peace conference, Romanian, Czech, and Serbian representatives mounted sophisticated propaganda campaigns. They portrayed Hungarians as oppressors and themselves as victims struggling for freedom. They exaggerated Hungarian atrocities while downplaying their own nationalist movement's violence. They cultivated relationships with allied journalists and politicians. Hungarian representatives, by contrast, were isolated and ineffective. They arrived late to the propaganda game. They lacked connections in allied capitals. Their arguments, though factually sound, failed to resonate emotionally. In the court of international opinion, Hungary had already been convicted before the trial began. Fifth, there was simple ignorance. Most Allied leaders knew little about Central European ethnic complexity. They viewed the region through simplistic nationalist lenses. To them, Transylvania was Romanian, and Upper Hungary was Slovak, based on the majority population, ignoring centuries of intermixed communities and shared history. They didn't understand, or didn't care, about the Hungarian minorities that would be trapped in these new countries. But perhaps the deepest mystery is this: why did the Allies believe these borders would create lasting peace? Multiple voices warned them that the Treaty of Trianon would breed resentment and future conflict. Hungarian representatives predicted it. Some Allied experts cautioned against it. Even certain British and American observers expressed doubts. Harold Nicolson, a British diplomat at the conference, later wrote in his memoirs that the Trianon Treaty was immoral and stupid. He described how the territorial commissions operated under political pressure rather than objective criteria. He lamented that reasonable compromise solutions were rejected in favor of maximalist claims. Similarly, American geographer Isaiah Bowman, who advised President Wilson, expressed private concerns about the injustice of some border decisions. He understood that trapping 3 million Hungarians in neighboring countries would create permanent instability. But his warnings were ignored. The mystery deepens when we consider timing. The treaty was finalized in June 1920, more than 18 months after the war ended. During this period, the situation in Hungary grew increasingly chaotic. A communist revolution under Bela Kun seized power in March 1919, ruling for 133 days before being overthrown. Romanian troops occupied Budapest. The country descended into political chaos. Did this chaos influence the Allies' decision? Absolutely. Hungary's communist revolution terrified Western leaders. They feared Bolshevism spreading across Europe. A weak, dismembered Hungary seemed safer than a strong Hungary that might fall to communism or align with the Soviet Union. Political fear trumped ethnic justice. Yet another layer of mystery involves the role of individual personalities. What if different leaders had been in charge? What if Woodrow Wilson had been healthier and more engaged? Wilson suffered a severe stroke in October 1919, leaving him incapacitated during crucial final negotiations. What if British or American representatives had pushed harder for moderation? What if Hungary had sent different delegates or mounted a more effective diplomatic campaign? These questions haunt historians because they suggest that Hungary's fate wasn't inevitable. Different decisions, different personalities, different timing. Any of these might have produced different outcomes. The tragedy of Trianon wasn't simply the result of unchangeable historical forces. It resulted from specific choices made by specific people at a specific moment. And that makes it all the more tragic. As the details of the treaty became public, suspicions emerged throughout Hungary and among objective observers. Was this really about justice and self-determination? Or was something darker at work? Many Hungarians suspected, and still suspect, that the Treaty of Trianon was deliberately designed to destroy Hungary permanently as a regional power. The borders seemed too calculated, too strategic to be mere accidents of ethnic distribution. Every decision seemed designed to maximize Hungarian suffering while strengthening their neighbors. Consider the economic dimension. The new borders didn't just separate people, they systematically destroyed Hungary's economic viability. Transylvania contained Hungary's primary gold mines, producing 83% of its gold output. The northern territories held salt deposits and forests. The southern plains held the richest agricultural land. What remained of Hungary after Trianon was economically crippled. The railway system was dismembered with surgical precision. Main lines that had connected Budapest to its provinces were cut. Railway terminals ended up on one side of the border, while the tracks they served were on the other side. This wasn't accidental. It was designed to break Hungary's transportation infrastructure and transfer economic power to the successor states. Suspicions also centered on the treatment of Hungarian minorities. If self-determination was truly the goal, why weren't Hungarians living in Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia given autonomy or protection? The treaty included vague provisions about minority rights, but these were never enforced. The successor states immediately began their own aggressive assimilation programs, doing to their Hungarian minorities exactly what they had accused Hungary of doing to them. In Czechoslovakia, Hungarian schools were closed, Hungarian language signs were banned, and thousands of Hungarian civil servants were dismissed from their jobs simply for being Hungarian. Land reform programs confiscated Hungarian-owned property and redistributed it to Czechs and Slovaks. The goal was clear: eliminate Hungarian presence through forced assimilation. Romania pursued even harsher policies in Transylvania. Hungarian universities were shuttered. Hungarian cultural institutions were nationalized. Prominent Hungarian leaders were imprisoned or forced into exile. The Romanian government settled thousands of Romanians from other provinces into Transylvanian cities, deliberately changing the ethnic composition. Yugoslavia treated its Hungarian minorities similarly. Hungarian villages were renamed with Serbian or Croatian names. Hungarian schools were converted to Serbian schools. Discrimination in employment and business made economic survival difficult for Hungarians. These policies suggested a coordinated plan. The Allies had not only given these territories to the successor states, they had given them implicit permission to eliminate their Hungarian populations through cultural genocide. The lack of Allied intervention when minority rights were violated reinforced Hungarian suspicions that the entire process had been a calculated attack on Hungarian nationhood. Another source of suspicion was the starkly different treatment of other defeated powers. Germany lost territory and population, but it remained a potentially powerful nation. Austria became small but ethnically coherent, almost all German-speaking. Turkey, despite losing its empire, kept its Anatolian heartland. Bulgaria lost some territory but remained viable. Hungary alone was reduced to a tiny, economically unviable rump state surrounded by hostile neighbors, each containing millions of trapped Hungarian minorities. This seemed like deliberate overkill. What had Hungary done to deserve uniquely harsh treatment? Some suspected French revanchism. France had its own historical reasons to dislike Hungary. During the 1848-49 Hungarian Revolution, Hungarian patriots had supported Italian and German nationalist movements that opposed French interests. More recently, Austria-Hungary had been a continental rival to French influence. French leaders at Versailles, particularly Clemenceau, showed particular hostility toward Hungarian representatives. Others suspected that Allied leaders were consciously creating an unstable region. By drawing borders that guaranteed ethnic conflicts and territorial disputes, they ensured that Eastern European nations would remain weak, divided, and dependent on Western powers for support. This served great power interests better than a stable, prosperous Central Europe might have. The most disturbing suspicion involved the concept of historical justice, or revenge for centuries-old grievances. Some Allied representatives seemed motivated by a desire to punish Hungarians for their historical dominance in the region. References were made to Hungarian conquest in the 9th century, to Hungarian suppression of the 1848 Romanian and Slovak movements, to decades of majorization policies. But this raised a troubling question. Should the children and grandchildren be punished for their ancestors' actions? Should 20th century Hungarians lose their homes because of 19th century policies or 9th century migrations? If this principle were applied universally, every nation in Europe could be dismembered for historical injustices. The suspicion of collective punishment was strengthened by the personal treatment of Hungarian delegates at the peace conference. They were housed in hotels surrounded by guards. They were not allowed to socialize with Allied representatives. They were summoned to receive the treaty, terms like criminals receiving a sentence. Count Aponii described the atmosphere as one of moral torture, where Hungarian representatives were treated not as negotiators, but as guilty defendants awaiting punishment. Perhaps the deepest suspicion one that still resonates today, is that the Treaty of Trianon represented the triumph of might over right. Despite all the noble rhetoric about justice, self-determination, and democratic principles, the treaty was ultimately imposed by victors on the vanquished. Hungary's arguments didn't matter because Hungary had no power to enforce them. The successor states' claims prevailed because they had allied backing. This suspicion poisoned international relations for decades. Hungarians couldn't accept the treaty as legitimate because they saw it as fundamentally unjust. They spent the interwar period seeking revision of the treaty, aligning with any power, including Nazi Germany, that promised to restore lost territories. This tragic choice would lead to even greater disasters in World War II. June 4, 1920, the Grand Trianon Palace at Versailles, a date that would be seared into Hungarian consciousness forever. The day the treaty was signed, the day Hungary's fate was sealed, the day that would be remembered as the greatest national tragedy in modern Hungarian history. The Hungarian delegation arrived knowing they had no choice. The alternative to signing was military occupation and potentially even harsher terms. The government in Budapest had debated for weeks whether to accept the treaty. Some argued for refusal, preferring national suicide to accepting such humiliation. Others argued that signing would preserve at least something, a Hungarian state, however diminished, that might someday recover. In the end, pragmatism prevailed. Hungary would sign under protest. The delegates would make clear that they accepted the treaty only under duress, that they considered it unjust, that future generations would seek its revision. But they would sign. 2 Hungarian delegates were chosen for this bitter duty: August Bernard, the Minister of Health and Welfare, and Alfred Drás-Lazar, the Hungarian ambassador to Switzerland. Neither was a major political figure. Hungary's most prominent leaders refused to stain their names by signing. These 2 men would bear the burden of affixing their signatures to the document that dismembered their nation. The ceremony itself was brief and cold. No grand speeches, no celebration, just a formal reading of the terms and the signing. The Allied representatives showed no sympathy, no acknowledgement of the human cost of what they had created. It was simply business, the administrative conclusion of a war that had ended 19 months earlier. As Bernard and Drás-Lazar signed their names, tears reportedly streamed down their faces. They were signing away Transylvania, where Hungarian princes had once ruled and Hungarian culture had flourished for centuries. They were signing away Upper Hungary, where Slovak and Hungarian communities had lived together for a millennium. They were signing away the southern territories, rich farmlands that had fed the kingdom. They were signing away the futures of 3 million Hungarians who would wake up the next morning as citizens of foreign countries. Back in Budapest, when news of the signing arrived, the city plunged into mourning. Shops closed. Black flags appeared on buildings. Churches held memorial services. People wept openly in the streets. The Hungarian parliament held a special session where representatives from all parties, despite their many differences, united in declaring the treaty null and void in the court of Hungarian moral consciousness. June 4th was declared a national day of mourning. Even today, more than a century later, Hungarians observe June 4th as the day of national cohesion, commemorating the tragedy and honoring the Hungarian communities still living in neighboring countries. The date has become as significant in Hungarian historical memory as any battle or revolution. But the true climax of this tragedy wasn't the signing ceremony in Versailles. It was what happened in the weeks and months that followed, as the abstract lines on a map became concrete reality for millions of people. In Transylvania, Romanian troops and officials arrived to take control. Hungarian civil servants were given 48 hours to leave. Hungarian teachers were expelled from their schools. Hungarian judges were removed from their courts. Property records were seized. Hungarian landowners, regardless of how many generations their families had owned their estates, faced confiscation if they couldn't prove their loyalty to Romania. The Székely Hungarians, who had lived in their Carpathian mountain communities for 8 centuries, suddenly found themselves cut off from Hungary by hundreds of kilometers of Romanian territory. Their ancient autonomy was abolished. Their right to use Hungarian in schools and government was revoked. Overnight, they became a besieged minority in a hostile state. In Upper Hungary, now becoming Czechoslovakia, similar scenes unfolded. Hungarian place names were changed to Slovak versions. Towns that had been predominantly Hungarian for centuries were Slovakized. Hungarian cultural institutions were shuttered. Hungarian newspapers were banned. The University of Pozsony, a center of Hungarian learning, was transformed into Comenius University, a Slovak institution. Families were torn apart by the new borders. A Hungarian farmer might wake up to find his house in Hungary, but his fields in Czechoslovakia. A factory owner might find his business in Romania, but his home in Hungary. Churches were separated from their congregations. Schools were cut off from their students. The new borders made no allowance for human relationships or economic realities. They simply divided according to political agreements made by distant powers. The economic consequences hit immediately. Hungary lost 90% of its timber resources, 83% of its iron ore, 62% of its railways, 43% of its factories, and some of its richest agricultural land. The industrial city of Pozsony, the grain-producing regions of the southern plains, the mining areas of the mountains, all gone. What remained was economically unviable, unable to feed or support its reduced population. Hyperinflation soon followed. The Hungarian pengo collapsed. Savings evaporated. The middle class was wiped out. Unemployment soared. Former soldiers returned from prisoner of war camps to find that their homes were now in foreign countries. Refugees flooded into Budapest from the lost territories. Over 350,000 Hungarians fled rather than live under foreign rule. They arrived destitute, traumatized, angry, and finding a country that couldn't support them. This economic and social crisis created political instability that would haunt Hungary for decades. The humiliation of Trianon radicalized Hungarian politics. Extremist parties gained support by promising to revise the treaty. Anti-democratic movements flourished by claiming that democracy had failed to protect Hungarian interests. The seeds of Hungary's later alliance with Nazi Germany were planted in the desperation and resentment created by Trianon. But perhaps the most profound climax of this tragedy was psychological. Hungarians had to reconceptualize their national identity. For 1,000 years, Hungary had been a multinational kingdom, a dominant power in Central Europe, a land-based nation connecting different peoples and regions. Now it was a small, weak, landlocked country surrounded by hostile neighbors, its people scattered across 7 different nations. The psychological trauma was immense. An entire generation grew up taught that a terrible injustice had been done to their nation. Maps showing Greater Hungary hung in every classroom, keeping alive the memory of what had been lost. Irredentist slogans like Nim, Soha, no, never, rejecting the permanence of Trianon, became part of national consciousness. This collective trauma shaped Hungarian behavior for decades. It influenced foreign policy decisions, alliance choices, and military strategies. It affected how Hungarians related to their neighbors. It created a national fixation on borders, territories, and historical grievances that sometimes overshadowed more constructive national goals. Yet paradoxically, the trauma of Trianon also unified Hungarians as never before. Class divisions, political differences, religious distinctions, all became secondary to the shared experience of national catastrophe. Hungarian communities in the lost territories maintained their language and culture with fierce determination. They established Hungarian schools in their homes when official schools were forbidden. They held secret Hungarian cultural events. They preserved their identity precisely because it was under attack. The climax of the Trianon tragedy wasn't a single moment. It was a prolonged unfolding of consequences that reshaped lives, destroyed communities, created lasting hatreds, and set the stage for further conflicts. The treaty that was supposed to bring peace and justice instead created conditions for future wars. The borders drawn to respect national self-determination instead trapped millions in countries they didn't choose. The punishment intended to prevent future aggression instead bred resentment that would fuel future aggression. June 4, 1920 was indeed a climactic moment in history, but not in the heroic sense. It was the climax of a tragedy, the moment when abstract diplomatic decisions became irreversible reality, when millions of people's lives were irrevocably changed by signatures on a document they had no power to influence. And the consequences of that day continue to echo more than a century later.